I'm John Fund, the columnist with National Review Online, and this is our closing event, but it's a special one because we have Carly Fiorina with us. Her full biography.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Her full biography is in your packet. Probably the most salient part of her career was in 1999 she became the head of Hewlett-Packard, which at the time was the 11th largest company in America. She's the first female to head a Fortune 20 company in the history of the United States. And there are rumors that she may be making a new endeavor in the coming days. If those rumors are true, it's long said that people in that line of work have to suffer fools gladly on the campaign trail. And I can assure you they also have to do one other thing. They have to suffer reporters gladly. A source of mine reports at a recent breakfast in Washington that a reporter from a competitor to National Review, the Washington Examiner, had a very burning and important question for you. He said, I've never met a candidate with pink fingernail polish, which I did not take as a serious question, but your response was classic. There's a first time for everything. But what I'd like to do is we're going to talk about ideas, the future, and especially business and technology. And before we get to things like net neutrality and Dodd-Frank, I asked two heads of technology companies what you should be asked. And of course they had substantive things, but both of them said the same thing. Since you ran a technology company, what's this with Hillary Clinton's excuses about the server? Now, I am soft on Hillary Clinton and the server. I understand it was all a big misunderstanding. That when she and Bill left the White House in 2001, just before they carted off the $200,000 in furniture that they later had to reimburse the government for, they got a briefing from the Secret Service on what the privileges of a post-presidential couple would be. And she wasn't listening carefully in the briefing. When they said you will have permanent Secret Service protection, she thought it meant permanent Secret Server protection. So it's all a big misunderstanding. But just to clear that up, as a head of a technology company, she said, well, I didn't want to carry two devices with me. That's why I had to put all of my emails on a private account. Are people out in Iowa and New Hampshire, places I hear rumors that you've been visiting, do they buy this excuse?
Of course not. They don't buy it because so many of us, and many of them, have multiple accounts on the same device. What a concept here in 2015.
And she has 4 devices, actually.
And I think the thing that is most amusing to me about this whole email gate, first of all, of course, it's a very serious thing because it demonstrates once again that she lacks the transparency necessary to build trust and leadership. And leaders need to be trusted. She's not a transparent person. She hasn't been. Not about servers, not about donations, not about Benghazi, not about any of it. But to me, the most amusing thing about it was the Secret Service. Don't worry, don't worry. The server is safe because it was guarded by 2 Secret Service agents, really. I mean, we're not worried about it being stolen. We're worried about it being hacked, actually.
Actually,
so,
I hear it's now in the van traveling around.
Yes, well, it could be in that van, too. Or maybe it ended up in a body of water somewhere.
Lake Whitewater.
There you go. There you go.
There are some nostalgia. There's nostalgia in the audience. But going back to technology, one of the things you've talked about, which other candidates, potential candidates, aren't talking about, is how technology can be harnessed in the role of citizenship. And Barack Obama was famous for saying, we're going to run a transparent government, we're going to put things online, and his own inspector generals have said that, of course, he's failed miserably at that. But you have given some thought to this. How can technology be harnessed to empower citizens and self-government?
Yeah. So it's a really important topic because, look, the reality is that government has become, over a 40-year period, year after year after year, just a vast, powerful, unaccountable, corrupt, inept bureaucracy. That's a fact. And you know, if you doubt that for a moment, all you have to do is read the reports. You know, we read heartbreaking report after heartbreaking report about the Veterans Administration's ineptitude in serving our nation's heroes. The VA, we learn, has been going through a major systems upgrade since 1989. You know, sorry, if you've been trying to do it since 1989, you failed. Or we know that the regional headquarters of the VA has had to have, it's in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, by the way, the building has had to have its foundations reinforced because of the weight of the paperwork on the bureaucrat's desk. Okay, this is 2015, so the VA doesn't work. We get Inspector General reports every 3 months, honestly, that reminds us that you can be a executive in the government and watch pornography all day long and get the same pay, pension, and benefits as somebody who's trying to do a good job. We get hundreds of billions of dollars worth of fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption that Tom Coburn lays out in excruciating, embarrassing detail year after year. Nothing happens. This is the kind of stuff that causes citizens to say our government isn't working for us anymore. It causes this huge disconnect. And yet, to the point, technology can be a really powerful tool. So one of the things I think we must do is go to zero-based budgeting, where we actually know where our money is being spent, because all we do is talk about the rate of increase every year. That's why every agency gets bigger and bigger every year. Well, if we went to zero-based budgeting, we could put every single budget out on the internet for everybody to see. People would be stunned. People would be stunned at how many duplicative programs there are. And then, of course, we can use technology. When people see what's there, we can use technology to engage them in what they think about what's there. People think I'm kidding when I say this, but I'm not. How many people vote for American Idol every week? A lot. Tens of millions of people vote for American Idol every week. What do you suppose would happen if the President of the United States went into the Oval Office and gave a speech to the American people and said, you know, I'd like you to take out your cell phones? What do you think about going to zero-based budgeting? Do you think we ought to know how our money is being spent? Please press 1 for yes, 2 for no. What do you think people would do? I actually think people would respond. What would happen if we went out to the American people and we said, you know what, maybe we ought to do for the whole government what Congress decided they should do for the VA when they were embarrassed beyond belief by the Arizona wait time scandal. Remember that scandal burst, they got a lot of pressure, and so they passed this bipartisan bill that says the top 400 senior executives at the VA can be fired. It's not that that's a bad idea, it's just, of course, it's not fundamental reform, and it's an idea we should apply all throughout government. So what would happen if we went to the American people and said, what do you think? Do you think if somebody's watching pornography all day long, they ought to get fired? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. We'd get an answer, and that would put pressure on the political system. This is 2015. We can use technology in amazing ways to re-engage citizens in the process of their government, and also to fundamentally reimagine how government ought to function. Just one last thought on the VA. Honestly, one of the first things I would do is take 10 25-year-old veterans who have returned from Iraq and Afghanistan. I picked 25 because their whole life is about technology. And I would ask them, how do you think you should be served? Tell us how you want to be served. And I'll guarantee you that 10 25-year-old veterans would give us a very different blueprint to reimagine how the VA should function than all the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. put together.
Well, one of the things you discussed at our lunch table was when you're going out and meeting with small groups, the biggest surprise you've had is the gulf in thinking or understanding between what you mentioned was the donor class in politics, the people who really pay attention to politics, and average citizens. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, because I think Ronald Reagan said this best 50 years ago. He said, I don't view politics as right to left, I view it as up or down. And often there seems to be a division not so much between conservatives and liberals as between elitists and people who are just struggling to get by in their daily lives.
Yeah. So I would say the disconnect is huge. And by the way, people, of course, people in Iowa and New Hampshire for sure are paying a lot of attention to politics. But what I sense over the last several years, actually, and in particular over the last several months because I've been out there so much on the ground, there is a huge gulf between what people think about the political class and what the political class thinks people think. There's a big disconnect between people and their government. And the vast majority of people, I was mentioning at lunch that I've seen a number of private polls that say somewhere between 83 and 90% of Americans believe that there is a political class that includes some media and some donors and all that, but there's a political class that's totally disconnected from their lives and that's stacking the deck against them. My way of saying that is that I have sensed for a long time a deep disquiet. I think there really is a disquiet in this nation. And I think the disquiet comes from a fear that people have that we are losing something core to who we are. And I think what we're losing, and I think what they believe we're losing, is a sense of limitless possibility that's always defined this nation. People don't feel as though their lives are filled with possibilities anymore. And we always thought this was a country that if it were hard to do and important to do, we'd figure out how to do it. People don't think that anymore. And I think what people think we're missing is leadership. So there is indeed a gulf. And I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to really talk to the American people about, look, every problem we have can we solve, we can reimagine government, but it does take citizenship actively engaged in the process of government, and it takes leadership of government.
In the 1880s, a famous writer said, the American frontier is closed, we've popped into the whole country, American exceptionalism is over, the possibilities are over. And that was just at the cusp of the greatest industrial revolution the country has ever seen, which made us the richest and most powerful country in the world. You at Lucent and at Hewlett-Packard began at the dawn of the internet era, seeing the possibilities of what that would bring. And here we are, 20-odd years after the World Wide Web, and we've created a marvelous industry, marvelous possibilities. The Obama administration has decided this can't be left to its own devices, we need net neutrality. And even though Congress doesn't want it, and people in both parties in Congress don't want it, and the courts have blocked them consistently, they are moving forward with, of course, what they call executive action, which I call the divine right of kings. What do you think about net neutrality, and how should we fight it if we should?
Well, we should. It's ridiculous. We now have an FCC deciding on a 3-2 vote that the internet will be regulated with 400 pages of regulation. Terrible idea, terrible idea. And of course, the dirty little secret of that regulation, which is the same dirty little secret of Obamacare or Dodd-Frank or all of these other huge, complicated pieces of regulation or legislation, is that they don't get written on their own. They get written in part by lobbyists for big companies who want to understand that the rules are going to work for them. And this is part of what people see. Look, crony capitalism is alive and well. Elizabeth Warren, of course, is wrong about what to do about it. She claims that the way to solve crony capitalism is more complexity, more regulation, more legislation, worse tax codes. And of course, the more complicated government gets, and it's really complicated now, the less the small and the powerless can deal with it. And so the big get bigger, the powerful get more powerful, the wealthy and the well-connected get more wealthy and more well-connected. I mean, that's a fact. It's what's happening, and it's partially why people feel so disconnected. So the dirty little secret of those 400 pages of regulation and net neutrality is who was in the middle of arguing for net neutrality? Verizon, Comcast, Google, I mean, all these companies were playing. They weren't saying, we don't need this. They were saying, we need it. And so the only way to level the playing field so that the small, the new, the entrepreneurial, the powerless have a shot is to reduce all this complexity. And meanwhile, while the big are getting bigger, we're crushing the small. So we're now, for the first time in US history, destroying more businesses than we are creating. We are destroying more businesses than we're creating. It's a terrible statistic. And it means that we're never going to get this economy going and growing again. And yes, I had the great privilege of playing important roles in Lucent and Hewlett-Packard, but like most people, I started out in a little company. I started out as a secretary in a 9-person real estate firm. My husband started out driving a tow truck for a family-owned auto body shop. Most Americans start in little, humble businesses, which create 2/3 of the new jobs and employ half the people. So when we're crushing those little businesses, as we are every time we roll out a new complicated piece of legislation or regulation, we're crushing the possibilities of this economy.
I grew up in Northern California, and part of the ethos was reading about Hewlett and Packard starting their business in a garage.
In a garage, 2 guys in a garage. By the way, Google started out that way too, in a dorm room, but they seem to have forgotten that.
Well, they have new friends in Washington.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
But you, I think, mentioned in an interview recently that looking back, you don't think you could have run Hewlett-Packard in the current regulatory environment in California, that it would have had to leave the state?
Well, I haven't said quite that, but what I've said is, you know, if you look at the data from California, so what's California? California is a deep blue state. It's been a deep blue state for a very long time, and what is the consequence? 111 billionaires, the highest poverty rates in the nation. The middle class has exited. Young families have exited. The tax base is eroding. California spends more money per pupil than 49 out of 50 states, and the outcomes are 49 out of 50.
It's almost like you're saying that liberalism equals more income inequality.
Well, that's right. It does. It absolutely does. And we need to point that out. It's also true that industry after industry after industry has been destroyed in California. Now, of course, liberals and environmentalists are in the process, the slow, agonizing process of destroying the agriculture industry. Yes, there's a drought in California. There have been droughts in California for millennia. But it's a matter of politics and policy that caused no new reservoirs to be built, no new water conveyance systems to be built, even though the population of the state doubled in the last 40 years. It's politics and policy that causes Washington, D.C. to say, we're going to control your water from Washington. We're going to protect this little fish called the smelt. We don't care that we're destroying tens upon tens of thousands of acres of the most productive agricultural farmland in the world because of that policy. That's the result of liberal policies.
Rich Lowry and I were at a dinner that you spoke at in New York, and you mentioned that in 2010 when you were running for the Senate, you went to the Central Valley and you actually met some people who had been unemployed because of federal water policy, federal environmental policy, and you had some conversations with them and looked into them in the eyes. And what did you see, and what do these liberal policies actually do to the actual families who have to bear the brunt of them?
It's a great question, and I actually think this is the core of the argument that we need to have in 2016. I believe, as I think you believe, that every one of us has God-given gifts, every one of us has potential. I believe no one of us is any better than any other one of us. I believe the highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others. And I believe we have to talk to the American people about that belief and how it translates into policy and government. Liberals don't believe that. Liberals believe some are smarter than others and some are better than others. And so some are going to take care of others. And so when I go to the Central Valley and I look, and I met 3 men in a little town called Mendota, a Democratic town forever, and yet the Democratic mayor, the Democratic city council of that town endorsed me because they had seen the consequences. I remember seeing 3 men sitting on it was like a stoop like this, you know, kind of a wooden stoop out in front of a closed up like grocery store in Mendota. They couldn't work. The fields they used to tend were just a dust bowl, and flowing through their town is an aqueduct of rushing water that would save those fields and save their jobs, and yet they cannot get at it because government 3,000 miles away has decided they don't get to use that water. And so the look in those men's eyes, it was flat-eyed. It was hopeless. They can't work, and dignity comes from work. They can't take care of their families, and purpose comes from family. And on top of it all, it's a man-made problem. Imagine how they feel. Imagine how they feel. And I think this is what enrages me about liberal policy, because they claim to care for people's lives, but in truth what they are doing is destroying people's lives. I've seen people tangled up in webs of dependence. Remember when President Obama goes out to California? I mean, I know we have Californians here. I can't imagine how people there felt. He goes to California and he tours the devastation of Central Valley, and he says that it's a result of global warming, and he leaves behind $100 million for a food bank. This is not compassion. This is disrespect of the highest order, of people's lives and their capabilities to build the life they want.
Behavior worthy of Lady Bountiful. Even though study after study shows that if we had dramatic intervention and regulation of the economy, we would not adjust the purported change in the climate by more than a few iotas, there seems to be this incredible desire to control the economy using climate change as a pretext. Obviously, we want to invest in new technologies, and they certainly can have an effect on the climate. But how do you see the climate change debate? And when you bring the issue up with people, what are you hearing their views as being?
Well, one of the things that I think it's really important to do is to talk about all the science, because, of course, liberals don't want us to read the fine print in the science. And all those scientists who tell us that climate change is real and that it's caused by man-made activity, they all also agree that a single state or a single nation acting alone can make no difference at all. But they don't want you to read that fine print. The environmental rules that the EPA is pushing forward now on a national basis were modeled after California's environmental rules, called AB 32. California enacted a law called AB 32 many years ago. This is a law that literally, not only does it manage water somewhere else, but literally it focuses a huge amount of attention and money on the protection of fish in the Delta, flies in the Inland Empire, frogs along the coastal waterways. Fish, flies, frogs, all of these are protected. And honestly speaking, if you are a California rancher or dairy farmer and you own more than 100 head of cattle, you must equip them with some sort of device. Really, I'm not making this up, so that their emissions, I don't want to get too graphic, but you can imagine what I'm talking about, so that their emissions aren't contributing to global warming. Honestly, okay, this is insanity. And all that California is going to do won't make any difference at all, and all that this nation is going to do isn't going to make any difference at all, except it makes a huge difference in people's lives. So you have 40% employment in the town of Mendota, and you have 40% unemployment now in coal mining communities in Kentucky or West Virginia. And when you have that kind of unemployment, what do you have? You have drug abuse, you have substance abuse, you have alcoholism, you have violence in families. That's the effect. And meanwhile, we're not going to make any difference at all. And when people say to me, well, we're going to lead by example and China will follow our example. Please, China isn't going to follow our example. I've done business there for 25 years. What they're meanwhile doing is figuring out how do we make technological advances for clean coal, et cetera. The answer to this problem is innovation, not regulation. And of course, the more regulation we impose on our economy, the less innovation we get. So my personal we should not argue with liberals about whether the science is real. What we ought to throw back in liberals' face is what the science actually says. A single nation alone will make no difference at all, so why would we destroy our economy, people's livelihoods, and people's jobs just to make a point?
Well, two countries that hope the United States does do exactly that are China and Russia.
That's right. China and Russia hope that we just keep trying to send a signal here.
You've negotiated business deals with the Chinese. You've met Vladimir Putin. What was that like?
Well, Vladimir Putin is a very formidable man. I sat probably about this close to him. There were no cameras. It was a private meeting. He's a formidable man. He's a highly intelligent man, highly educated, quite cosmopolitan, quite charming. I mean, if he were here and wanted to charm you, you would be charmed. He also is driven by not ideology actually, lust for power. And he has been very effective and very systematic and very strategic actually about consolidating power. Political power, economic power, military power, and now territorial power. There is no way that a man like Vladimir Putin is going to be dissuaded by a gimmicky red reset button. Not going to happen.
Especially if it's misspelled.
That's right. That's right. Vladimir Putin will only be stopped when he faces strength and resolve on the other side. And President Obama is continuously giving us a false choice. His false choice is, if you don't agree with the little that I'm doing, you must want to rush off to war. It's not true. There are many things that we can do right now to convey strength and resolve to Vladimir Putin, and we are not doing any of them. And by the way, we are completely in charge of every single one of the things I'm about to suggest. We should rebuild the Sixth Fleet. We should rebuild the missile defense program. We should conduct regular, pretty aggressive military exercises in the Baltic states, and we should arm the Ukrainians. Every single one of those things we are in control of. We can do them. We don't need anyone's permission, and they would send a very strong message. And until Vladimir Putin gets that message, he isn't going to stop.
We have some questions from the floor. I think this probably is from a Californian. They mentioned that if only Anglos had voted in your Senate race, you would have won. Do we need to make any kind of a special appeal to Hispanic voters? And how should conservatives talk to women voters, or should they make a special appeal to them?
Yeah. So, you know, it's interesting thing about California. So the California election in 2010, of course, I lost the general election. My husband still can't. How did you lose to Barbara Boxer, he says. But here's the truth about that election. I won more Republican votes, more Democratic votes, and more independent votes than virtually anyone else running anywhere in the country in 2010. That's how big California is. It's a demonstration that a conservative can win Democratic and independent votes. I ran as a pro-life conservative. You don't do that unless you mean it in California. It's also not enough people in Orange County voted. Not enough people in San Diego voted. Our people didn't come out. And the truth is, not all of our people came out and voted in 2012. Not all of our people came out and voted in 2008. So I think it's critically important in order to win in 2016, and we have to win. We have to win. I think only a conservative can unify this party, and we need a nominee that will excite this party. But we also need a nominee who can reach beyond this party and talk to Democrats and independents alike, not by changing our points of view, not by changing our principles, but by landing them in people's lives and talking to people not in judgmental tones, not in vitriolic tones, not in angry tones, but by talking to people with empathy about what their lives are actually like. So we got to get our game, our folks out, and then reach beyond. I do think that there is a point of view that sometimes our party, our candidates, don't care about people. You'll remember Mitt Romney, a great man, a compassionate man, he would have made a fine president. But if you looked at his exit polling data, what you'd see is that he won on every substantive issue, and he lost by 62 points on the question, cares about someone like me. We have to talk to people where they are, and we have to talk to people in language they understand, and we have to have empathy for what their situation is. We can't dismiss people. We can't dismiss anyone in this nation. We can't dismiss, for example, the 47%, because I've met with a lot of those people, and they too want to live lives of dignity and purpose and meaning, but their lives are tangled up in webs of dependence that they cannot escape from, even when they want to. So, look, women are 53% of the vote now. As I'd like to tell the Republican National Committee frequently, of course it's important that we reach out to young people. Of course it's important that we reach out to Hispanics. But if we lose with the majority of the nation, women are the majority now, we're going to lose. So we better reach out to women too.
Two kinds of business people tend to run for office. And there's a fundamental question that sort of divides them. There's the type of business person who says, I'm running for office because I want to run government like a business. And then those who say, well, government and business are a little different, and they go into more explanation. Which camp do you fall in?
Well, government and business are a little different, just like business and charity are a little different. Our government is based on a constitution that has a separation of powers. I mean, we don't have a president right now who pays much attention to the Constitution, but those three co-equal branches of government are not how a business runs, for example. So of course there are things that are different, and yet there are tools and disciplines that come from business, whether that business is managing the family budget around the kitchen table, or that business is a 9-person real estate firm, or that business is a $90 billion technology firm. There are certain things that work. So for example, it works to know where you're spending your money. I mean, just kind of a basic thing. You know, a family knows where they're spending their money, so should the government. It works to have some goals, some metrics, some consequences for good performance or bad performance.
Like the ability to fire people?
Yeah, we don't have any of that in government now. We have none of that. It just makes sense that if you're going to get a report year after year after year, and I personally am very sorry to see Senator Tom Coburn retire, but here is a man who has put forward a report year after year after year in excruciating detail that tells us where all of this fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption are, and nothing happens. And I think the reason nothing happens is because in politics we actually have a lot of managers. Managers, you know, that's a term you get from business, but what are managers? Managers, they're important sometimes, but you know, managers are people who do the best they can within the existing system. Managers deal within the status quo. Leaders change the system when the system isn't working anymore. And we have a lot of managers in politics. I don't understand how you can sit and look at that report year after year after year and do nothing. The only explanation to me is we have too many managers and not enough leaders.
Just as a side note, at National Review we met recently with Senator Coburn. He's finished his cancer treatment, he's in pretty good shape, and he says you ain't seen nothing yet from him.
Good.
So I think he will be...
Good.
I think he will prove you can often do as much as a private citizen than you can in the stifling environment of the Senate. I think we have time for just a couple more questions. I was a great admirer of your father, who was a very famous, well, you'll go into that, but you have a potential devil's advocate here who asks, aren't you a Carly come lately to politics? You didn't vote for a long time, and why would the American people choose somebody with no experience in the political arena?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for saying you were an admirer of my father's. My father became a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Tough
Joseph
panel.
Sneed, a true conservative, and you know, he was a wonderful example of someone who stuck to his principles, but also had a lot of friends, and that's hard to do as a conservative on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He was very proud of the fact that his opinions were never reversed by the Supreme Court. And of course, the Ninth Circuit is the most reversed court of appeals in the nation. So there was a period of time in my life where I didn't vote. That's true. And I've been very forthright about that, and it's not something I'm particularly proud of. But it's true of a lot of people in this country. A lot of people in this country. A lot of people in this country, a lot of women, for example, disengage and don't vote. And it's not that they don't care. It's that they think their voice doesn't count. And our voter participation rates are going down in this country, not up. And I think it's because a lot of people think what I do just doesn't count. It's true, I've never held elected office before. But I'm certainly not a political neophyte. I was an advisor on 2 presidentials. I ran my
Presidential what? I'm sorry.
Presidential campaigns, both for McCain and Romney. I ran my own Senate campaign.
What advisory board were you appointed to?
Well, I was a major surrogate for John McCain.
No, I meant on for the federal government.
Oh, I was about to get to that.
I'm sorry.
I chaired the advisory board at the Central Intelligence Agency. I advised both Secretary Gates and Secretary Rumsfeld from the Defense Business Board and did large pieces of work for each of them. I advised Secretary Rice when she was the Secretary of State and did a lot of work for her on her information technology systems. I've advised the NSA, I've done policy work, so I'm not a neophyte. I also really do understand how bureaucracies work. It's interesting. People out there are not at all troubled by the fact that I haven't held elected office. In fact, the people that I run into consider it a great asset. And I think that, you know, as I think about this, look, it's not an easy decision to decide to maybe run for president. It's also not an easy decision when you know that a lot of people may well underestimate you. On the other hand, I started out as a secretary. Being underestimated is sort of the story of my life. But as I think about the job that has to be done, I mean, we get all excited about what it takes to win the job, and we do have to win the job. But I think we're at a pivotal point, and I think it's worth thinking about what it takes to do the job. And I think what it takes to do the job now is someone who actually understands how the economy works. Somebody who understands how the world works and who's in the world. Somebody who understands bureaucracies, because the government is one giant, unaccountable, corrupt bureaucracy now. Someone who understands technology, because technology is a tool that can be used to change the direction of bureaucracies and also to re-engage people in the process of government. And finally, I think it takes someone who understands executive decision-making, which is making a tough call in a tough time with high stakes, for which you're prepared to be held accountable. And I don't think you read about that. I think you learn it by doing it over a lifetime.
Last question. So far, it appears that only Rand Paul and Carly Fiorina are interested in taking the issues to Hillary directly. Are some of the other potential candidates leery, intimidated, or scared of her?
Well, I can't speak for the other candidates. I can only speak for myself. And what I believe is that this is going to be a fight. It's going to be a fight in 2016 because Hillary Clinton may be a vulnerable candidate in many ways, but we should not underestimate her. She is extremely hardworking. She's highly intelligent. She will have the best ground game in political history, and she will have more money than anyone else running. And so we have to have a nominee who can take punches, because they're going to throw a lot. We have to have a nominee who can take punches, but we have to have a nominee who will throw punches. And we will remember back to 2012, we all thought Benghazi was going to be an issue, and it wasn't. It wasn't an issue because our nominee wouldn't throw the punch. We have to engage in this fight. And I must tell you that Americans out there are ready for a fight because I actually think they know it's a fight. I think they know this is a fight now. It's a fight for the direction of our nation. It's a fight for whether we're ever going to get this government under control. By the way, very practical example of the pivotal point we are at In the next 5 to 6 years, we're going to have a whole slew of baby boomers retire out of the federal government. We can have a leader in the White House who understands that this is a golden moment not to replace one of those people. Or we're just going to let things drift as they always have, and every one of those people is going to be replaced, and then we won't have an opportunity again. People know this is a fight, and so we got to take that fight to Hillary Clinton. And we can't give her excuses. We can't let her run on the stuff she wants to run on. And we all know what Hillary Clinton wants to run on. What she doesn't want to have to talk about is her trustworthiness. She doesn't want to have to talk about her track record. She doesn't want to have to talk about the impact her policies actually have in people's lives. And I promise you, if I were the nominee, I will not falter. I will not falter. And I will land every punch. And on the ground where she has to explain her transparency, her policies, her track record, ladies and gentlemen, on that ground, we can win this fight.
Okay. Well,